Okay. So, good morning, afternoon, evening, whatever this ends up being put
Good
out.
morning.
But, so we're probably doing a little something a little bit different today, trying something a little bit back to what we were kind of doing a long time back. We're just kind of conversing instead of reading, at least for today. We'll still do the readings, but for this one, we're not reading, I don't think. So, I guess just talking about energetics and relationships and like just all relationships, not just romantic ones necessarily, but just friendships, whatever, just the way we interact with people and the energetics they're in and what can maybe be some faux pas, I guess, would be kind of what we were talking about already this morning. So figures like maybe it's something that we could just carry on talking about and really looking at, I guess, taking radical responsibility for what we're doing. And even if in the moment maybe we didn't initiate something, is there anything that we're laying the groundwork for in the way that we tend to be? Because like was talking about how like I tend to create a dependency on me with people in general. And then at some point, if I'm having a rough day or I'm worn out or whatever, it can sometimes kind of backfire on me to where I no longer want to be in that position. But everybody around me has gotten so accustomed to me wanting to be in that position that they're just going to assume I'm going to continue wanting to do that.
And then you end up feeling
Right, and then maybe for that day you feel a little resentful or like that they don't appreciate you or whatever, like invalidated in some way. Even though maybe 8 or 9 times out of 10 that is fine for you. Like most of the time it may not bother you. And so then it comes into like this idea of whether or not you're selflessly doing things for people or if it's actually, I guess, like
selfish.
Being careful that when we're doing these things, we're not. I think we have to be careful that all the things we're doing are sustainable without needing something from other people, or being very good about communicating
what you need.
Yeah, okay. I'm cool with doing these things, but on a long day, I need permission to come home and do XYZ thing. Or I need permission to do this. Or now we're kind of getting more talking about relationships, of course. But even with friends, you could be like, yeah, like I'm usually fine, but like maybe that one day they want to hang out and you're burned out. Being able to be like, yeah, I can't do it. Like, I need time. Like, I need space. Like, being able to communicate that without feeling, I think a lot of people feel almost obligated. Or at least I tend to often feel it's very rare that, like, again, this is like, we're talking about the 1 out of 10 times or whatever. But I think I have built a tendency from my childhood dealing with the various, like my mom had a boyfriend at one point, and he had kids. And his older kid, I remember, I think I got along with him quite well. I remember kind of maybe looking up to him and stuff. And then after like 6 months, we had moved across the country, and then we moved back. California, yeah. And so we moved back.
Every day I would say, Mom, when's the time coming back?
Yeah, I was stuck over there for a while. But then I came back, and I think there was something about, like, you know, my whole life got uprooted. I probably grew some amount of attachment to these other people, especially the older brother kind of person that I suddenly gained. And then I got moved back across the country, and then that person's gone, never hear from, you know, like, and so then I think in that way, dealing with like the feeling of possible rejection, I guess, or the idea of like, abandonment kind of thing is something that could be where some of my putting myself in a position of just constantly like serving, quote unquote, could come from, where like I want to make people happy so that they don't leave kind of thing. And obviously that's fine and dandy, but it may not always be the healthiest thing if it's not really, if you're putting yourself out in order to do it often, you know, of course.
Do you think maybe also you saw how not only it affected you, but maybe how it affected, you know, your mom, who was someone that you really cared about. And so you maybe as a little kid kind of felt like, I need to be there for my mom. I need to serve, like, protect my mom by, you know, helping serve the people I care about so that they won't, you know.
I think at a certain point I learned to bury my emotions because I felt like there wasn't time for my emotions. I'm not saying I always did that. I think obviously you have moments where you break down anyway, but I think in general like my mom was going through a lot of stuff. There wasn't always somebody else there, so I felt like I had to like provide space for her and try to be there for her, even at a very young age. And then of course, as time went on, you got other siblings. You're the oldest. They're having meltdowns.
You're the responsible one.
I have to be the responsible one. I think at a very young age, and then onward, I got better and better and better at like not even. And I don't think it's even conscious. And I do think that I am lucky in the sense that I could be a lot more messed up if I had. I think there's a lot of instances where really things aren't. There are plenty of times where things are not a bother to me. They're fine. Like I'm. But when there is something that's going on, I'm not even always fully aware of it because my mind and my system just immediately buries it as a rule of thumb.
Protection mechanism.
Right.
Yeah.
And so then in theory, 6 months, a year later, or just on a bad day, that comes back, but I didn't even realize that was a thing at the moment sometimes because I wasn't conscious enough in the moment. And I think that comes into being not just curious about people that you're with, but also curious about yourself and trying to actually be attentive, not in a self-absorbed way, but just actually noticing how you're feeling in interactions and how things are affecting you and trying to actually be with yourself in that moment as opposed to being and still with the other person. It's a weird balance, I guess, but I think it's something that you have to be careful of. Otherwise, too, it can maybe sometimes seem like people are like, well, why didn't you tell me this, then? And it's because it wasn't on my mind then. And it's a little odd.
Or because I think I'm sorry, I shouldn't.
No, go ahead.
Because I can relate to that, also the oldest sibling, a lot of responsibility, especially going to India, being away from my parents, feeling responsible for my younger brother, and then when I started working, on the ambulance, very quickly I learned that, okay, I'm seeing all these traumatizing things, but in order for me to be effective at my job, in order for me to be able to function and continue helping these people, I have to compartmentalize and bury the feelings I'm feeling in the moment because, whatever I'm feeling, the person that's right here that I'm dealing with, they're going through much worse.
Yeah.
So there's the tendency in me as well to me later, them first, which in a pinch when there's high pressure or whatever, I'm great. I can function, I can be in an emergency room and I'm but then, you end up just burying. Oh, I'll categorize that later. I'll look at that later. It's okay. You're triaging your own
and
self,
if you don't unpack it later.
You don't unpack it. And so, then those feelings, they stay buried and unresolved, but inevitably they're going to resurface.
Right.
And
if we don't take the time for ourselves, I think it can be hard sometimes. I mean, especially for you, because you obviously have a whole family, you have a very stressful job, you have very little time off, you have a lot of things going on, so it's hard to necessarily feel like you have the time or that it's and again, I think if in the moment you're not even necessarily consciously aware that you're putting it on the back shelf or in the furthest reaches of the attic or something in your mind, then if you're not fully aware of that, then later trying to take time for just you to sit with something doesn't come up as an idea because you have so much other things that need to be done. They feel like they're more important. There's kids got this practice, this kid's got to go this place, so you got to go do this, you got to go talk to your dad about whatever. There's just things to do, and so why would you then take the time if you're not fully aware that you've been putting things that need to be dealt with? Why would you then take the time out to go? Actually, I'm gonna need an hour and a half to myself. I need to just kind of deal with some things, or I need to go talk to somebody and kind of get some things off my chest or whatever. Or taking the time to do that with your wife or whatever the case may be. It's hard for us to want to prioritize that if we're not even really being honest with ourselves that that's happening. And I don't think it's always an honesty thing. Like I said, in my case, I think a lot of times I'm just not aware of it. But you're not either not being honest or you're not being aware of yourself enough that sense of what is happening for emotion.
The lack of awareness is part of the defense mechanism because you know that if you're to let your guard down and let those things out, now you're going to have to deal with them. It's like opening the closet door that's stuffed full of shit, and you're like, when I open that door, it's going to come crashing out. And I'm going to have to fucking sort it all out and clean it up. Yeah. So you don't want to open that door.
Yeah.
And it becomes it's
a lot. Yeah, it's definitely difficult, and I think it's easier to... And then it kind of comes out in a fight sometimes in not a very healthy way because of the fact that we've been burying it. So then it comes out as ammunition instead of it coming out in a healthy way, either in a more calm conversation or just with ourselves even, to where we've actually processed it. It can just even surprise us sometimes and just come out our mouth instead of it being something that we've processed. And Luckily, I think for me, my issue is very much the opposite in the sense that it's even hard for me to, even when I'm working through things, it's not always easy for me to word things, which can be a good thing because then you don't, in a fight, you're not necessarily like, saying anything real nasty or anything, but it can be more difficult to work through sometimes because it's harder for me to, I guess, like,
to let the other person know how you're
right, because if you're not fully able to like put it into words, then it's like, how do you explain? And sometimes it might just be because you're not there yet. Maybe once you fully have figured it out, it's easier to put into words, and I think that's obviously part of it. But
see, that's what I tend to need. That's why in like it's frustrating because when a situation blows up,
yeah,
it's hard for me in the moment to necessarily like. That's why sometimes I need a little bit of time to like, recalibrate before diving into a rather
yeah,
deep discussion, with another, whatever, spouse or
yeah,
close friend, father, mother, whatever. So then I think in the moment, I feel like I'm not able to express myself properly. Therefore, the other person's not really hearing me in the way that I want to express myself.
right. Okay,
And then it escalates. And now because of the the misunderstanding and communication,
yeah,
then like it just creates this cascade effect where it devolves into not clear and healthy communication.
yeah. I mean, I think if that's the case, I think that's all the more important is to actually take time to process things on your own because I think for some people it may be they're more in the habit of it, or maybe just it's very easy for them to just kind of spew it out and just like put it on the table. But I think if it is difficult, then I think like people like us probably have to take more time to actually sit with it, understand it for ourselves, and that way when we need to talk about it, we know how to communicate it. And I think things are ever changing, so it doesn't mean get in your head about it and like freak out about it and think about it so much that now you're stuck in it and now you're just so like, because I think that's also like, you have to be really careful about that because you get into your mind too much and it can really not help. But I think there is a line there where you want to at least feel the thing properly. And then maybe if you know where the feeling is coming from, you're able to adapt to it, or maybe realize, oh, it wasn't actually coming from me. This person was in a bad mood and that kind of affected me. All of a sudden the bad mood is affecting you a lot less because you realize it wasn't originating with you. Or like whatever, like if you at least are fully aware, I think it comes with the curiosity of like yourself. And like, if you go into a meeting and you're having a good day, but there's this a-hole in the meeting or something that like maybe chews you out, whatever, does things, you can end up leaving, even if they don't directly attack you, feeling like you're now in a bad mood. But if you're fully aware that you were fine and you didn't, you handled things professionally, whatever, and that other person was having a bad day, you may even change their mood. And even if you don't, when you leave, you may be able to just be like, okay, well, I'm leaving that there. It had nothing to do with me. Whereas if you go in and you're not fully aware of you're not fully aware of how you're feeling, what's going on for you, you could easily leave the meeting feeling frustrated and angry, just like that person was frustrated and angry, just because they passed their mood to you and you have no idea.
So
you're having a bad day.
So you're saying we should take, what I'm hearing is you should take time to feel or recognize the emotions that you are experiencing.
That or at least be willing to be
or
more
recognize
present
how,
to yourself.
Okay.
When you're going through your day-to-day life, because then maybe you'll notice that when things are bugging you, and if it's like directly you or if it's somebody else, and once they leave the room you'll be fine, or like what is going on. And then maybe for somebody like you and me who maybe we do tend to not always catch everything, maybe you should just start scheduling some amount of time, like every other week or once a week, to just kind of sit and make sure and go through your week and see if there are things that you hadn't properly dealt with, if there's something that's bugging you, something that's weighing on your mind, see if it needs to be addressed, or if it just needs to be like kind of, okay, yeah, but there's nothing I can do about that. Like, it depends. You don't always need to address, you don't need to go fight with everybody that caused the problem in your week, but having the ability to know what all those little issues are. And I think when we know all the little things that are bugging us, we're less likely to take it out on the next thing that bugs us. You know, like if the next time something happens, you're like so already aggravated and your kind of limit is pushed. So then that person becomes, or that thing, or whatever, becomes like the target of your issue. Whereas if you know, like fully, not like I kind of know my week has been a lot, or I kind of know, like, you know, there's like very vague kind of like, yeah, my week's been kind of long. What does that mean? Like, you know, it means something, but it's not direct enough to really identify anything. And so I think, again, I think that's easy to get into this trap of like, well, that means I need to sit for 5 hours and meditate on all my problems. And that's a really bad, I don't think that you're going to get anything out of that. I know that's not what I'm suggesting anybody do. Because I think the more you generate and think about feelings regarding anger or stress or whatever, you're just going to feel more angry and stressed. So I don't think that that's necessarily healthy. But I think there's a difference between being aware and like thinking about things that have happened and going into that emotional state. Like, you know, just think about like, okay, well, what made me mad? Like, take a step back from it. Oh, it was because this. Like, I was mad when I was running late to work, like we've talked about in the past, because this person got in front of me. Well, if I left earlier, that wouldn't have made me mad, so why was I really mad? Am I mad at myself for not leaving early enough to give myself a buffer? Am I mad? Like, what is making me mad at this person who's just driving, minding their business? Why do we get such road rage? Everybody gets this for the most part, at least sometimes. So, like, what is the deal with us feeling personally offended by people on the road, half the time doing things that we ourselves have done and probably will do again?
So I think
Like,
it
what
comes
is
back
causing
to, I think what you're getting at is that we need to be able to take real accountability
Yeah, accountability is
of
probably a good thing.
ourselves and realize that the way we're feeling is not
Anybody else.
caused by anybody else but ourselves.
That's a very direct way to put it. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that is not even necessarily what I was thinking about.
And you
consciously,
project that
but-
out onto other people
Yep.
and other situations
Yep.
as a way of protecting yourself and saying it was because of them or that that I'm feeling this way. But really,
Well,
you are...
When you take accountability, you're giving yourself power, actually. Like we talked about this briefly this morning, but like this is an example that I find myself using more and more often, and I'm not the only person that uses it, but at the end of 8 Mile, the movie about Eminem, Eminem gets up and basically talks trash about himself, says everything his opponents have gotten over on him, and basically just lays the groundwork for, I'm going to tell you all of my mess ups, all the things I was too stupid to see when I should have, all the stuff
Hold
that I
himself
could have done.
accountable
I'm going to hold myself
to
accountable.
everybody.
I'm going to say, yeah, I'm this, I'm a mess up, I'm this, blah, 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 blah. When I get done with that, the next rapper who needs to fight him they've been busy trash talking each other. What do you say about somebody who's just told you all of their flaws, all the things that they missed, all the things that you took from them, and now all of a sudden it's like, okay, well, what do I say now? Like, I can't say the stuff he just said about himself. I'm going to look dumb. Like, he's already said that happened.
That's such genius.
And so, like, so then now he's like, and the guy wasn't smart enough to flip it around or say, maybe talk about himself. So he won and he busted into the rap game. And that movie's based on, like, you know, of course there's some, you know, whatever.
It was a good movie. I love that movie.
But they did a good job of showing, like, what made him stand out.
Yeah.
And he's always owned his shit in his rap songs.
Yeah.
And so in that way, I think if we go about life to where we look at, first of all, we can't control anybody else, so that's one thing. Like, if we go through life wishing people would act differently, we're just going to be disappointed consistently because nobody's ever going to act the way we want them to all the time, no matter what. No matter how much they may want to, no matter whatever, no matter who they are to you.
The only thing, you can't even really control your own self unless you're in control of your mind.
Right, and if you can't even control yourself, why in the world would you be able to control someone else?
Yeah.
So, in that vein, I think if you are in a state of mind like Eminem at the end of 8 Mile, where you're like taking extreme accountability, it doesn't mean that you're beating up on yourself because something happened, like, oh, it's my fault that happened. No. It just means that you know you're the only person you can really affect and really completely control, quote unquote. And even then, there may be things that happen to you that are a little bit outside your control, but how you react is in your control. What you do next is in your control until the day you die.
Yeah.
And so in that vein, I think if we start to be like, it feels bad sometimes because someone's taking ownership and being like, well, I messed up, or this is actually on me, can feel a little bit bad. Like you're admitting, like it's like you're letting go. You're like, you want to be right. We all want to be right all the time. It's an ego
Defense
thing.
mechanism.
We want to be right. It helps us feel good about ourselves in the short term.
Yeah.
I think in the long term, it actually is extremely detrimental because now you're attached to being right.
Yeah.
So now when you're in a conversation or at work in a meeting or conversing through an email or talking to a friend, it bleeds out, and we've all had those moments, and some of us have friends who are almost always having these moments where like you can't say anything without them arguing with you, just because they need to be right.
Well, it's because they're protecting. You have
There's an
now you have this
Their
ego you're
ego
trying
is
to protect.
trapped. They're protecting, their identity is wrapped up in everything.
Yeah.
Because they're not able to separate themselves.
If I'm wrong, then now I have to question myself.
Right. Right.
So they don't want to. They don't
want to question themselves, but because being wrong, like basically, first of all, none of us know everything. It's a very interesting thing that we do to ourselves. Because on the one hand, if you look at it logically, if you, like you said, separate emotions, and kind of just look at it and analyze it, it feels kind of weird that we do that. Because it's like, well, yeah, nobody knows everything. Why in the world would I act like? Why would I expect that people would expect that of me and feel like bad if I say something wrong or if I do this? But it's gotten to a point where in some extreme situations, it's kind of like the cancel culture we now deal with.
Yeah.
Cancel culture now is somebody said something wrong. We don't care about the context. We don't care about what, where they came from, their background, whatever maybe upbringing they had. Because we all go through certain things. There's social pressure to everyone. Yeah. It's not only to certain types of people or groups of people. Everybody grows up in these different areas and to some extent or another has different social pressures going on. Peer pressure, bullying, whatever. Their parents think a certain thing. Their parents train you to think that way too. Yeah. If you don't think that way, then you're a mess up. And then you go out into the world.
Pressure, religious pressure.
Right. From all kind of areas. And so, yes, maybe this person is wrong about that thing he said. But, and it's interesting because it comes from this place of like, Jesus went on the cross and was forgiving the people putting him on the cross.
Yeah.
But if somebody gets on and says something that you don't agree with, you think they should basically be put on a cross or burned, is the way people act. Like, cancel them, never give them another job again. Yeah. If they're in the spotlight already, screw them. It's like, okay.
Well, really? It's funny because the whole like social justice thing, like I understand the sentiment behind it, the outrage, but at the same time, you are now doing the same thing
in reverse.
It's
the opposite side of the same coin.
And just because, maybe from your point of view, you are right. Maybe morally, you are right. Sure.
Absolutely.
But it doesn't, like, in principle, you're doing the same thing. No, you're not always right.
And so if now in principle, you're doing one person for the one time that they did the one thing wrong, or even the 7 times they did 7 things wrong, they're human too.
Yeah, so you're dehumanizing them.
The other thing I think that comes from this is these are often the people that get crazy about it. I mean, there's a lot of things that actually need to be addressed. I'm not saying social justice is not important.
Yeah.
I'm saying sometimes the way it comes out is unhealthy, just like with everything else. Everything in moderation, learning how to do it in a healthy way is very important. And I think what happens is if you make these people wrong and you demonize these people for doing something or being wrong one time or saying something they shouldn't have said because they didn't think it through all the way first, or maybe from their perspective, for some reason that's correct, even though if you really look at the scientific evidence and all these other things, like that's not correct. The bigger picture is not correct. It doesn't mean you have to agree with the person. It just means you have to, okay, well, they're coming from a different place. I don't understand where they're coming from. It's a little weird, but okay. Or like, they're wrong, and why don't you and maybe the other person, a lot of times these people, maybe, first of all, sometimes a sentence by itself can sound way different than the whole paragraph that it was said in or the whole conversation that it was taking place in. But also, like, now that you've made them wrong for that thing, if you're ever wrong, now that you've demonized them, wanted them fired, all these other things, now, if you ever say something wrong, if you're incorrect about one of your beliefs, something inside of you it's an even bigger deal to be right now. Because now you've set up yourself to say, well, if I'm wrong, like, I'm a real a-hole, I'm a piece of POS, all these things. It's like, if you would just be willing to, if we would spend more time holding ourselves accountable and holding ourselves like, radical responsibility of like, oh, this is on me, what can I control? And even with like all these social justice movements, if we focus on our communities, our friends, the people that we know, because often online, you're not going to get into arguing with somebody and win, right? Nobody's convincing anybody online, 9 times out of 10, maybe even more, and maybe always. But if like the people like you and me, if we notice that one of us maybe has a little something that we, for whatever reason, like, oh, I don't know if that was the right way to handle that, we could bring it up and say, hey, what was up with that? And then person, well, I don't know, this person, blah, blah, blah. And you're like, okay, well, hold on a second, whatever. We like could call each other out. And because we have a relationship, we're more likely to accept it from the people in our lives. If we all focused on our community, ourselves, our family, our friends, the whole world would change. But instead, we focus on the people on TV.
Ultimately ourselves.
We focus on the people on the billboards. Yeah. And we want to focus on these people that we actually have no control over. We want to scream and rant and rave online because it makes us feel a little better in the temporary. And I get it because I have done that on occasion. I understand. And it's hard to even stop doing that because if we were to stop doing that as a collective, we would have to say we were wrong to do it. and we have this attachment to be right. But the other thing about the wrongness is that wrong is such a strong word. I don't even think that half the time we like I'm wrong to have done that thing. No, you said something that ended up not having the result you wanted. Let's backtrack and say, look, I didn't mean that the way it came out. Let me explain what I was coming from. Let me explain what I'm feeling. It's just what happened. Wrong and right almost makes it sound like there's a possibility something else happened.
Well, wrong
Unless
and
somebody
right
built a
makes
time machine.
something black and white.
Right.
And nothing's black and white.
But also, unless somebody built a time machine, there's no
perspective.
going back. There's no changing it.
Yeah.
Like right now, nobody has the ability to go back and change what happened. So there's no wrong or right. It's what happened.
Yeah.
At this point, anything in the past, wrong or right. Now, if you think about what to do, you can get a little into like, okay, let's make sure we do the right thing. Let's figure out as best we can. But even that's going to be flawed because we're going to miss something. We're going to not understand something about this. We're not perfect. Somebody's going to misconstrue something, whatever. And so I think that that aspect of like realizing like if we stop looking at other people and started looking at ourselves, because we're doing that, automatically other people are going to get better. Because people are going to see you doing that. And it's going to affect them. Or it's going to affect them either one of two ways. They're going to start to see and go, oh, wow. And maybe they start to tweak a little things, or maybe they start to ask you like, what is going on? Or they get out your life because they can't deal with it. It's like, oh, no.
You're
like,
changing too much.
You're changing too much. And it's like, okay, well, that's
They
fine.
cancel culture you.
And, right, they cancel culture you. And you're like, okay, that's
whatever.
good. Like, we're good. I understand. I hope your life is fantastic, and you know I'm around if you ever want to come talk. But also, you don't need people like that anyway. And there's gonna be people we don't get along with, even if we're living our best lives, because there's so many people, and we all think a little differently. We come from different backgrounds, etc. You may find that there's people you just don't really get along with. You don't have anything in common. There's not much to talk about. You disagree on some things. Doesn't mean you have to be nasty to each other.
Yeah.
It's like we turned the whole world into a sports game where you're on one team or the other team, and
My
you're
team
chanting
has
and
to
raving,
win.
and my team has to win, as if the
If
founding
my team
fathers,
didn't win, you guys cheated.
right?
Yeah.
It's as if the founding fathers built a system. Without getting into politics, so this will be the only political thing I'll say. But the only political thing I'll say is it's as if our founding fathers built a system wherein they decided, just for fun, we're going to make the right party and the wrong party, and they're going to argue, but we're hoping the right party wins. As if the reason there is more than one party is not because they said, you know what, there's some truth to everything. We need to learn how to compromise. There's a lot of ideas, and where we came from, there's a lot of problems because one way, my way, or the highway was the way it was done. So let's make it so that it's more conversational. There's lots of room for all kind of opinions, and people vote on it. And so they put the system together for the way it was. Multiple parties where people can voice different things, have different platforms, and they're supposed to compromise. Not, if you don't do my way, I'm shutting down the government.
Demonize.
Not on like, all these different things that are going on. It's like that wasn't. I can't imagine that was what they wanted. Because if that was what they wanted, why wouldn't they have just said the only party that gets any credit is this party because they believe the things we believe in and they get to do things this way. And while we're at
Well,
it, we're not even going to do the
if they wanted a
voting thing.
one-party system, they'd have crowned George Washington king,
right.
and there would have been like
Right.
that's
It's not
what we
they
were trying
did.
to leave.
But
yeah.
in honor of them, we fight and act like that's what they would have wanted because I believe it is easier
to blame than take.
It's also just less
to take
work
credit.
to just go, well, I just believe in most of the things Republicans believe in, so if a Republican's running, I'll just vote for a Republican.
Yeah.
It's less work. We don't have a lot of time. We're all crap for and I myself also only understand certain elements of politics. Only recently started to learn more just because of how nuts things have been to some extent, how much stuff has been thrown back and forth, all this mudslinging going on. And so you should want to start learning a little bit about it. But it's easy to say, I don't got the time, got all these other things to do. I don't really know. I saw one or two things this guy said, seemed okay. He's also the same party as me. I'll just vote for him. It's become the easy way out. And that's not to say that that's unacceptable.
But now you've emotionally invested yourself in that team, and now you want that team to win.
Exactly. Because now
that's
if
a
that team doesn't
reflection
win,
of
you're
yourself. Yeah. You voted for. Oh, yep, you're wrong.
Well, you're wrong. You're wrong again. And now we're so attached to being right. But I think it's just like look at it like even if you do something that's quote unquote wrong. Let's just say it's feedback. You did something, didn't get the result you wanted. Forget about wrong. You didn't get the result you wanted. So now, what do we do? What do we change to try to get the result we are looking for? It's not about wrong or right even, really. It's about, oh, the feedback I got from the world or this person or whatever when I did this thing. Like I tried to start a business, it failed, right? Tried to do this, it failed. Okay, feedback I'm getting was not good enough. Let me try something else. It doesn't mean that you suck, you're worth nothing, this like depressive, and of course you may have those moments of feeling things, and that's like we started out talking about those feelings, but I think this attachment to I think also instant gratification has a lot to do with it. Our phones, we can get so much entertainment, so many things at a click of a button. We can talk to people really fast. We don't have to go visit them. We don't have to write to them. We don't have to wait for a response. Now, if they read it and don't reply to us in 2 minutes, we're upset because we feel like they don't love us, whatever. And I think that has built.
this is the kind of conversations I like to have, not the.
And you can have good conversations on here.
You can.
It's just a
it's
slippery slope sometimes.
It is.
And I use my phone plenty, so I'm not going to sit here and say, but it's a tool that can be misused just like every other tool.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that because we have all that instant gratification, we are we are more likely to expect that when we do something, we get the result we want immediately. When we hit play on Netflix, it plays the show we hit play on. In fact, half the time, if you're clicking around on your remote, I know I do this, and somehow it goes like it didn't react at first, and then it reacts, and then it goes to the wrong thing. Like, what the fuck? I didn't tell you to do that. Like, you're almost immediately annoyed with the machine because like it's like, whoa, why don't I just? Oh, that's not what I meant to do. Like, take a step back. Just that's not the result I was looking for. Let me go back and select the right one. And if we're doing it with small things like that, Lord only knows we're doing it with all these massive things, all these major things, and like myself included, we're all attached to being right. And so I think if we go through and try to take the time to make ourselves not wrong, because that's just, you don't need to beat up on yourself again, but I think if we try to make everybody else in our life right, take radical responsibility in the sense that we're always looking at what we can do better, and it doesn't mean that if somebody says something nuts, you're like, yeah, I agree with you. It just means that you're not attached to being right. You're not going through like, I need to be right, and I'm going to do what needs to be done to be right, because that's where problems arise. The church in the past, with all the crusades, all the things that have gone on, these so-called freedom fighters, half the time terrorist people now, all this need to be right has caused so much conflict in the world. And some of it's on a massive scale and very easy to see. Mm-hmm. And some of it's on a much lower scale and much harder to see in our little personalized, little personal interactions. Mm-hmm. But if we could go through life thinking, how can we make other people right? Which kind of, I mean, you can get into the definition of what that means, because then it sounds like you're saying, well, like if a friend of yours says something that you don't agree with, you should just say, yeah, sure. Like that's, I mean, energetically, they don't feel that you're trying to take that from them or you're trying to be in the spotlight or the right person. You're not trying to be like, well, no, that's not how that works. Because now if they're really wrong about something and it's gonna, you can maybe say like, well, wait, what makes you say that kind of thing? But it's the way you do it. And I think getting into the details is me gonna give you my opinion, and that doesn't help anybody anyway. So I think it's just like,
how you communicate,
sit with it
not
and just
necessarily
think about how do I make you right without agreeing to shit that I shouldn't agree to, you know?
Well, the way my dad puts it is, especially like with adults, right? when you're a kid, right? You're throwing a fit, temper tantruming, you want your way.
Yeah.
Kids don't necessarily know how to admit that they're wrong.
Yeah.
Therefore, they have this extreme overreaction. Where, so with adults,
Yeah.
not just with adults, with anybody, he was
Well,
saying
also
that
kids learn that from their parents a lot of times, honestly.
For sure.
I certainly did.
My dad was saying when you're like having communication issues like that,
Yeah.
if the other person is wrong,
Yeah.
rather than just crucifying them with it, you should always leave them room to save face.
Right.
Because when you allow them room to save face,
Yeah.
not that you let them remain unaccountable for it,
Right.
but you hold them accountable, but then leave them some space where they don't feel completely cornered and trapped.
Right.
Then it gives them an opportunity. Am I going to lash out and be nasty?
Right.
Or am I going to take the exit that was afforded me to save face and, recognize it for what it is, and then, okay, I'm going to use this opportunity to save face, admit I was wrong, or whatever the case may be, and then grow from it. And
I think you
and
explain
also,
it in a nice enough way that, like you're saying, I think is what I'm hearing at least, is that you're explaining it in a nice enough way that when you're not just like yelling at them, no, you're wrong and this is right.
Mm-hmm.
You're just like, hey, what's making, or can you explain that? Or like, well, what I was reading the other day actually was this, and you tell them, and then you give them an opportunity to go, oh, well, I guess, I was seeing it here. Maybe it wasn't as up to date, or I had to check into that. You give them an opportunity to be able to step back and make you a little bit right too. Yeah. I've actually seen that happen really well one time at work. There was a coworker. I came back. I didn't know what was happening. There was like some kind of massive argument, just like a back and forth going on about how something should be done.
With two coworkers or
two coworkers, and I was kind of like, wait, what's going on? And basically, it had to do with it's detail oriented, but it's not the details don't really matter. But basically, I walked back. I felt I knew the answer to the question. And the person who was responsible for doing said task felt the answer was a different question, a different answer. And I said what I thought, and I said, but it's possible that I'm wrong. I'm like, but this is my understanding, and this is why it's my understanding. For all I know, they've changed it, or maybe what you've heard was before they changed it to what I've heard. If you want, we can go double check. And initially, when I said this is the way it's done, because the first thing the other person, the third party was saying was kind of just like, this is the way it's done, and they was like, no, this is the way it's done, and this is the way. And then I kind of walked in and said, well, this is the way it's done. And then as I was saying, I'm kind of thinking, okay, this is probably not going to be helpful. So as I finished, I said, but it's possible I'm wrong. That's just my understanding. And just by doing that, the other person who has been being told this is the way it's done and going like, nope, this is the way it's done, immediately was like,
it provides
you
a
know
third
what?
option.
Well, he was just like, yeah, well, I mean, I could be wrong too. He's like, no, I could be wrong too. Like, it just like completely changed. He's like, I could be wrong. Maybe I heard it wrong, but that's what I was told. I'm like, okay, well, we can go verify and just double check. And we did, and we got it worked out, and we did the thing that needed to be done. But like, just by me saying, I still got to say that I think this is the way it's supposed. I didn't have to go, yeah, do it the wrong way. That's fine, in order for him to be right. I just had to say, I could be wrong. I had to be not attached to me being right. I had to be attached to saying, this is my understanding, and presenting it in a way that is not like, here's the gospel. I hope you like it. Otherwise, we've got swords and guns.
Yeah.
Like, like, you know, it wasn't done in this aggressive, in-your-face manner. And I think we all struggle with that. So, like, we can do well 5 times, and we're going to screw up the 6th time. Like, you just have to keep adjusting and noticing the feedback you're getting. If you're dealing with somebody and they're throwing shit in your face, something they're getting, something you're doing is not getting the result you want. And can you control the other person? Absolutely not. There are people that we just aren't going to get along with, I guess, sometimes, whatever. But if there are people that are in your life, like in a big way, I think usually it's like something that can be done. It may not be something that can be a quick fix. It may not be like, well, if I just said just perfectly, then it would be fine. But there's a way to like, okay, this is not working. Let me try a different thing and see if a different result occurs. Instead of like, you know, is it Einstein that said, or is it Franklin? I think it was Einstein that said, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing and expecting a different result. You can't just keep smashing your head against the brick wall.
Yeah.
You know, you have to go figure out another way or climb over it or do something different than just banging your head into it until you hope that either your skull breaks or you get through the brick wall. Like, and it's really easy when we're right, or I should say, when I'm thinking I'm right, to just keep banging my head against the brick wall. Because I'm right. This is the right thing to do. This is the right way to do it. And you see it all the time at work, because a lot of people are attached to their checklist. This is the way things are supposed to be done. But there are scenarios wherein that's not the way it should work. Yeah. And you can tell, okay, clearly the checklist was written for different scenarios. This is a little bit outside the box. Let's attach it. Let's attack it from a different angle, because this is an outside the box situation. I am good at doing it at work. I'm not as good at doing it the rest of my life, and I'm trying to like learn how to merge it all together. Because at work, I'm very good at doing that kind of thing. And at home life, it's easy to slip into the habits, being right, etc.
Yeah.
But because I'm good at doing work, actually, it helps me in other areas, because I notice, okay, that's the way I should be attaching, like dealing with, communicating, thinking about, and handling things outside of work. And it's assisting me, rather than it being like, wow, why am I good at work and not at home? I'm not making myself wrong for it. I'm noticing, hey, it works really good at work. Doesn't work quite as well in some of my own personal relationships and things going on at home, family, whatever. How can I translate that? In what way? Because obviously it doesn't look identical. Work is different. It's a professional environment. But if you can do it in one place, you can probably tailor it to do it somewhere else. You just have to figure out what that is. And I think
that's where I know I struggle in that area, like trying to translate the way the way I handle myself at work versus doing it at home. If I can do it at work with these complete strangers, why am I, like, what is the reason why I can't do, not that I can't do it at home, but it becomes harder to do it at home sometimes, or in your more personal relationships. And I think that, well, it's interesting, like, you know, going back to like Einstein and doing the same thing, right? So in you know, when I was in the Army, we were training in Texas for my medic school. Yeah. You know, they go over, so when you're triaging trauma casualty patients or whatever, you know, sometimes you have, you know, you'll be the only healthcare provider and you have to treat multiple people. And so they, you know, we have these like, I forget the exact like term, but like protocols, or I can't remember the term off the top of my head, but they're basically like, okay, you have a patient who's presenting these symptoms what do you do? Okay, you know, their blood pressure's going down, heart rate's going up.
Yeah.
Okay, I know based on these symptoms, this patient's going into shock. Okay, if they're going into shock, then I do this step. If I do this and nothing changes, now I go back and I reevaluate the last thing. Okay, that didn't work. Now I'm going to go here, try this. It's so you could get 5 different shock patients, and you know, the treatment is similar to all of them, but you have to analyze each patient as its own patient. You can't just say because this guy presented these symptoms, this guy presenting these symptoms also is suffering from the same thing as that guy. They could be 2 totally different issues, and you have to start with each patient. You have to go back. Okay, ABCs, are they breathing? Check the pulse, check, okay, are they losing blood anywhere? Okay, nope, now I'm going to move on to here. Okay, and now I'm going back. I'm going to recheck these other steps. Okay, are they still breathing? Are they not bleeding anymore? Is there a wound that I missed?
Yeah.
You're constantly having to reevaluate and triage, and so we.
Well, I mean, I think
we
I
can
like
try
that
to handle
example
that
a lot,
with,
actually, because of what you're saying. Like, imagine if in that scenario, you as the caregiver got to the point where you would attempt, you're doing your 5-step or whatever steps you got to like the 3rd step, and whatever you're doing isn't doing what you expected to do. Imagine if you were so attached to being right that you wouldn't change it.
Yeah, and then that guy dies.
Right, because you were like, no, at that point in time, this should have been what needed to be done, and he was wrong for it not working.
Yeah.
And now he's dead for being wrong. Yeah. Like, because you're so attached to being right. Now, in that
or
situation,
if someone comes and corrects you and the doctor says, hey, man, you should be doing this.
Right.
Not, but the protocol says this. Okay, but it's not working. So what, you know,
And so I think being open to hearing those other opinions is what saves people's lives a lot of times in, like, crazy situations. And I think, you know, it's easier. Sometimes it's a little bit easier for us when it's life and death, because we sometimes give up some of that. And that's how we know it's a false ego thing. Because if it was really us, if we really identified it, how could we if it was really our being, how could we ever give it up? Even for a moment. If it's actually who we are, is that these belief things, these things that we think, the way we act, if that's really us, then there's no chance for change. Throw in the towel, there's no point, because that's who you are. So if that's what you believe, nobody's changing. Also, it means that there's no point in talking to anybody else about anything, because they're not going to change. But why would we bother? I'm not going to talk to you about yourself, because you're going to do you all the time. So this idea of kind of encapsulating all of our activities and the things that we currently think as if that makes us who we are.
The self-ego.
No,
false ego.
The false ego. No, it's things that you currently believe. It's things that you currently believe, not it's who you are right now. We identify to such a strong extent with our beliefs, the things we think, the things we feel. And yes, they're important. It doesn't mean ignore them. I'm above it all. That'd be great, but most of us can't actually do that. Let's be realistic about it. But it does mean that maybe in the moment when something is sort of attacked or oh, that's not right, you can just take it back and go, okay, well, maybe I'm wrong about that. Let me try this instead. Or, well, okay, well, tell me why you think I'm wrong. Because instead of being well, no, that's not how it works. I heard an interesting thing, and I don't know if I really want to get into it, but basically, I heard that 2 friends were talking about something. I'm going to keep it very basic and just very personal in the friend area. 2 friends were talking about something, and one of them was bringing up how defund the police, basically talking about defunding the police, okay? And the other person was kind of there's 2 different scenarios. 2 years previous, the same 2 people had been in the room, and they did not get with each other at all. It was defund the police, that's stupid, was the reply, right? 2 years later, they're in the same room, it gets brought up again. Now the second person, instead of saying that's stupid, said, well, what does that mean to you? Because it doesn't really make sense to me. When you say defund the police, what do we then do? Because to me, I'm thinking that means lawlessness. Cowboy days, people can just gunsling around. What happens if there's no police? Where's your thought process going? Because I'm not getting it. And then instead of it devolving into this argument of you're stupid.
It's taking the topic by that general statement. Yeah. It's taking the topic to, what do they call it? And it's Latin, and ad absurdum or something like that, so to an absurd level, it's unrealistic. Defund the police, right. It naturally is going to evoke a radical reaction.
Defund fund, you just can't agree. It's so stupid. And so then it turned out that really what the person was talking about mainly was to say that we need to put more money into social work. That social workers should be called for some of the things police are called for. You could also say that maybe police should be trained as social workers, but then you're mixing duties and stuff. Maybe you should just have a separate branch that maybe is somewhat affiliated, but really is social workers, whatever. Maybe the guy with the gun is outside just in case things get real crazy, but not the person that goes into the domestic situation.
Yeah.
The social worker goes in.
So the
and handles
problem
it.
that
Like,
I'm seeing with
there's
this
a-
is that it's easy for us to just use a label
Right.
to describe
Our
your
whole idea.
position,
Right.
well, when the label doesn't actually accurately describe your
Well,
position.
that's what I was going to
It's
say.
like-
Defund the police doesn't even really add up.
Yeah.
That's not even what we're talking about.
Yeah.
Like you're basically like
it's meant
almost
to
like
evoke a
lashing
visceral
out.
reaction.
Right,
That's
right.
why the right wing
And that's why
does
people,
that.
right?
That's
and
why it's propaganda. It's
people
meant to
fight each
evoke.
other because
Yeah.
people are like, oh, well, you're wrong and you're wrong. It's like, wait,
Yeah.
well, hold on. If we take a second and like don't read the headline.
Yeah.
And I was talking to somebody about this the other day, and I was kind of like, I don't think it should be called defund the police. I get why it's called that because there was a lot of problems about the police at the time. There's been some major
But
issues.
it just leaves you open to attack from that, like
Right.
from that position of you
let's
guys
be
are
like
crazy.
Eminem and 8 Mile and talk about how can we fix the situation? What are we doing wrong? How can we take responsibility? And part of that would be like, let's as a country figure out our social worker situation because it ain't working.
Well,
We're not
it also
doing
requires the police. In this scenario,
basically
it would
invalidating.
require the police to
give up.
admit
Right.
that there is a
Yes.
problem.
Yes.
And then, okay, let's
And they're
talk
less likely
about
to do
how
that
we
when
can
you attack them.
They are.
Defund the police. I'm taking your money. Of
Yeah.
course, I imagine someone walked up to
Okay,
your house and just
good,
said, "Hey,
yeah.
I know you risk your life at the hospital every day and stuff, but we're taking a bunch of your money because we just feel like you don't do that good of a job." And you're like, "The fuck? Like, I need to feed my family. What is this?" So of course they get defensive. Now, could they not get defensive? Sure, they could not get defensive. We could also not use a
They also
negative
work a high
term.
stress job, and they also feel
Right.
like, wow, I'm
We could
protecting the
do
country.
fun-
Not all
fun
of the police
social
are
work.
bad.
Fun social work. How about
know,
a positive connotation
yeah,
with our
fun
stream?
social
Fun
work,
social work or whatever. I don't
Yeah.
know enough about the details. I'm not a huge politic person, but I think like that's often where we get into these hangups.
Labels.
Politics, personal relationships. You decide to attack the other people with your belief instead of saying, and then people are like, well, they do it. Okay, an eye for an eye makes the world go blind. We're all going to be blind, deaf, and dumb by the end of this. That's fantastic. Like, yeah, they
Yeah.
do it, and it doesn't mean we should. Is that what we're, again, Jesus on the cross, he was blessing the people, saying, please forgive them.
Forgive them,
Please
they know
forgive
not
them for
what
their
they
sins.
do.
They know not what they do. While he's getting nailed to a freaking cross. How many people would do that? Not most of the people that we're talking about right now. They would be, damn y'all to hell, you guys are, whatever. And so
Well, it's
he's
funny
teaching
because
by example
yeah.
about how not to attack those people, even if they're wrong. Those people were very wrong to be doing that. 110, 50,000% wrong, and yet,
He showed compassion.
please
and
bless
love
them,
and
it's
forgiveness.
okay. This is, do not take revenge on them, like all this stuff. Like he was just focused on, I hope they're okay. Which is, we're not going to get there. A lot of us are not going to get there. But if that is the goal, if that is the example, then we need to act like that's the example when we're communicating in our personal lives, when we're communicating in our professional lives, and be like, okay, well, how can I? And we're all going to slip up. The thing is, when you slip up, just admit you slipped up. I shouldn't have said it like that. You know what? I didn't word that right. Let me explain. And I've gotten better and better at that because I used to be really bad at arguments, and it's still a lot of work to be done. And again, I think
It's
I've
always
gotten
gonna be work.
extremely good at work, and I'm not as good in my personal life.
too.
So it's just something
Yeah.
I have to continue to figure out how
But
do I
the fact
translate
that you
this?
can even acknowledge that means you're heading in the right direction.
Yeah, I mean,
Because
we're going somewhere.
like I say, it takes years to get to a certain place.
Yeah,
Things are not going to change overnight.
No.
It's going to take years to get to where you want to be if you feel that where you are is not where you want to be. I want to be over here, I'm over here. It's unrealistic to expect that you're going to get from here to there with minimal work, minimal effort, minimal self responsibility. Like I am ultimately in the position I'm in because of the choices I made in the past. Whether they were conscious choices or unconscious choices, I'm here because of, as a result of my actions. That's where the whole, karma comes in, and that's why it's so fundamental to our belief.
yeah,
Also going back to, the false ego, this is why, the yogis practiced yoga, because practicing yoga, the pranayama, the breathing practices, these actually fundamentally would change, your brainwave state. It would change the chemical balance, the chemical and hormone, surges in your brain. And it actually allowed, and it still does, that's why yoga really does help. It does help both physically, mentally, psychologically. the point of it is to disassociate ourselves, and by self we mean the soul or the Atma.
Yeah.
We, like you're saying, we think we take all these feelings and emotions and think that's who I am.
Right.
But no, really, I am the observer of those emotions. I am the observer of the actions I'm doing and the reactions I'm suffering.
Yeah.
And when, that's the state of, self-realization.
Yeah.
The whole goal of yoga is so that you can be in that state more and more and more until eventually you're in that state all the time.
Yeah.
And that is when you really begin to make advancement. When you're able to recognize, because then you have no attachment to your false ego. It means nothing to you.
Yeah.
You realize I'm beyond that. I'm beyond the emotions, and it almost creates like this dichotomy between like this fundamental principle of bhakti yoga and Vedantic thought is the understanding that something can be at the same time one and different from each other. So at the same, so it seems that you have to kind of worry about all this stuff as you're trying to make material progress in your relationships.
Yeah.
Oh, I need to communicate better. I need to do this. I need to manage my emotions better.
Yeah.
But really, if you remove yourself from the situation, that doesn't mean that you then, not in this false renunciation way, but how Arjuna is being told by Krishna, if you do your duty without attachment to your family, without attachment to your friendships, without attachment, not that you don't care about those people.
That's the problem.
Yeah.
The thing that
you
people
do
don't
your
get is that
you
when
do
you're
it
attached, it's a selfish thing.
Yeah.
Because if you weren't being selfish, you wouldn't be attached. So if you can do your service and your duty,
that doesn't mean don't love those
way,
people or
you
don't
can
care.
love them. In fact, you love them more because it's no longer about your attachment to them that's driving your actions. It sounds like he's saying hands off. What he's really saying is serve them unconditionally.
Yeah.
And in that way, you're going to be able to do your service much, much better. Because what happens when we have attachments is we get jealous when we shouldn't. We have these other issues when we shouldn't. And next thing you know, you're causing all these problems.
Well, and then at the same time,
if you're attached,
yeah.
First of all, to a certain idea, which may be wrong. Secondly, to a person, and maybe the idea of that person, which is not even who that person is, but you've put them in a box. I mean, there's so many problems with attachment.
Well, not to mention if you're doing the renunciation or if you're saying, oh, okay, so I just need to serve everybody and then I'll fix all my problems. If you're doing it not from a real place, then you find yourself back at the square of where
back to attachment. You're
exactly. Well, now you're going to be doing all this stuff, and eventually you get down the road, and you're resentful because man, I was being so sacrificed and you weren't doing it really. You weren't being unattached. And that is really where we're
fixing your life by not fixing it. You thought that if I just give, at some point everything will be perfect.
You have to be giving in the right consciousness.
Yeah.
And then.
Yeah, it's a hard balance to walk, and something that I was touching on but not saying earlier, and I want to make sure I say it before we wrap up, is just that the point is, I think, a very kind of simple point is that I think when you take full responsibility for things, to the point where you blame yourself for if you're, I mean, this is
not that extra. It's all your fault.
No, but you take it on yourself. Okay, if I hit a deer on the way to work, is that my fault? Sometimes you can't avoid it. But if you go, well, if I had left 2 minutes earlier, I wouldn't have been here when that deer came here. You don't need to beat up on yourself about it. But understand that everything that happens in your life is a direct result of actions you're choosing to make. Or not make. And some of them may be outside of your control, like the deer thing. If the deer just jumps out of freaking nowhere, you may have no option. Or whatever, a tree falls in your car while it's parked outside. You don't, yeah, sure, if you had parked it somewhere else, it wouldn't have fallen on it, but how in the world are you supposed to know? It doesn't mean you need to get in where I need to be psychic. It just means know that it's no one's fault. It's just what happened. And
be unattached to...
And then when there's even the slightest chance of, if I adjusted this, if I hadn't had the speed to get to work, maybe I wouldn't have had to hit the deer, or if I hadn't, whatever. If you really look at what could I change, you might find that in a lot of scenarios, even more so often than you think, you now have the power to change it, because it's all happening as a result of choices that we're making to either do or do not do things, or react or not react in certain ways. And if you really imbibe the idea that it's all a result of my actions, as a result, you actually gain immense power. You don't lose it. Because I think in the moment, sometimes we feel like we're giving up power by saying we're wrong about something, or maybe I was wrong, maybe I could have done something different. It's like, oh, well, now I'm just saying I'm wrong, and that means they're right, and they're going to lord it over me forever, or whatever. There's like an irrational like path we just like fly down. And when we do it, right, when we do it, we're actually saying we have all the power. Because now that means that if we don't like this interaction we're dealing with, there's a way around it. That means we don't do whatever we did to end up here. We don't worry about what the other person did. We can't control that. But what did I do that ended here? Is there another method I could try? Is there something else I could do to not end up here? And then you just keep trying things. You get the feedback. You try this, you get the feedback. It doesn't need to be about how wrong it is in this really negative way. It's just like, okay, that's not what I was looking for. Try something else. Still not what I was looking for. Okay, that's kind of what I was looking for. Cool. Now you address the next thing. And there may be times, like I said, where there's sometimes you could just be dealing with somebody who's like a friend or something, and you realize this person's just not a good friend for me. Like, no matter what I do, it's off the wall. It doesn't have to be hateful, though. It's like, okay, well, you do your thing. Like, wish you the best. Hope everything works out for you. And again, if I'm not attached to being right, it's not even about, well, you're doing your life wrong, but okay, fine, see ya. Have fun doing it wrong. It's just like, okay, that doesn't work for me. It might work beautifully for them. Maybe their life is a huge success in their mind, and they're great. And maybe it really is a huge success, and actually it's something I'm missing. So instead of being hateful about it, it's just like, okay, you do you and I'll do me, I'll be over here. It doesn't need to be hateful, because a lot of times what happens is you have a falling out with somebody, or you disagree with somebody, and when you see that, you kind of feel a little negative.
It drags you down, and it makes you feel like crap.
Whatever, and then you're talking crap about each other. It's like, why does it need to be like that? It's just like, hey, you know what? We don't see eye to eye on that many things, and it's okay. You're going to do your thing over there. I'm going to do my thing over here. I wish you the best. Like, I honestly do. And that's something that in a lot of areas I've actually gotten decent at well, thankfully, as well, because there are people that I don't really speak to or hear from as often as I have in the past, and it's not like this big negative thing for me. And it could appear that way to other people. I don't know how it appears, but it's just kind of like, it's okay. Like, we're in different places in our life, different things that people are wanting, and for whatever reason, it doesn't seem to be working as far as our, like, having like a strong relationship right now. That's okay. Like, it's not a big deal. It doesn't need to mean that I'm secretly seething in anger about it, or that I'm super butthurt. It's not about me.
Yeah.
It's not about me being right. It's just about we both are living different truths right now. We're doing our own thing, and that's totally acceptable. And I think that most of us, and myself in many other areas, other than a couple little areas that I seem to have gotten some shit worked out in, have plenty of problems with that. And I think if we just remind ourselves that we have the power, and when we give up the power for a minute, we don't have to beat up ourselves. Oh man, I gave her the power now. Now I'm stupid for giving the power. Now if I take it back, it means I was wrong.
Take the power back.
Now if I take it
Rage
back,
Against the Machine.
I was wrong. Yeah, it's like I was wrong to give it away. So now if I take it back, I'm going to admit that I was wrong. So I'm going to leave it over there with him because I was wrong to give it to him. No, take that shit back. And you're like, you know what? That was a bad idea. Let me get that back. Okay, now we're good. Like, just own it when you make a mistake.
Yeah.
Like, imagine if when you made one mistake in chess or something, you just said, well, I lost the game. People, you didn't see something, but you try to recuperate. Like, there's so many examples one can give of trying to learn from the feedback you're getting instead of making it about this giant, like, evil
I don't
thing.
remember if I told you this, but like a while back it was like the week that I switched from, because in the beginning of the year I was working night shift. And then the week I rolled over from night shift, I worked all night, came home, was home all day. The next morning at like 4:30 in the morning, I had to go to work. So I had like part of a day off. I go into work. I'm tired as hell. COVID, it's already been stressful last week. I didn't really have a 2-day weekend like I wanted. I had part of a day off. I come in, I'd already had stuff on my mind from, whatever. And I end up going into a patient's room. I drew his blood, came out, was not paying attention, and in my defense, my boss could have given me more time off. She could have said, you know what, Hans has been busting his ass. He really could use a little bit of time off, especially if he's going from a week of night shift, going into a week of day. Like, she could have been more understanding.
Sure.
I'm tired, I'm, flustered, I wasn't paying attention. I put a different patient's labels
Right, you
onto
label
a
that
different
wrong.
patient's blood. I've done it before, but normally because I'm very
You
detail
realize
oriented,
it.
I normally catch it before I send that stuff down to the lab. This time I didn't. My boss ends up calling me saying, hey, one of the machines went off. That's not Mr. So-and-so's blood in those tubes. You must have drawn the wrong patient. Because I had not been paying attention, and I normally do check the wristband and ask
yeah.
the social, and the situation had been, I went into the right patient's room. The patient had something going on that I needed to clarify something with the nurse. I go out, I find the nurse. She says, yeah, I'll come right in there, but in the meantime, could you help me draw somebody else's blood, right? Me not paying attention, getting thrown off of my normal routine of going into the room.
Right.
So then I drew that patient's blood, came out, put this patient's,
Yeah.
So I go down there, and the whole way down in the elevator, I'm like thinking, God damn it, like if she would have given me,
Right,
effing
right.
time off, like this,
yeah.
I can't believe she put me in this position. But then I'm like, you know what? Yeah, those excuses are all fine and valid, but it doesn't change the fact that I drew the wrong patient's blood, put the labels on those tubes, and sent them down to the lab. And when I got into her office,
Yeah.
she wrote me up, and I could tell she was kind of preparing for like a confrontation because a lot of my coworkers throw that kind of stuff at her.
Yeah.
And I said, she's like, well, like, do you have anything to say? Like what happened? And I said, I was tired. I'm not going to lie. I wasn't paying attention. And at the end of the day, I was the one that stuck the needle into the patient's arm. And so it was my fault. And I apologize. I'm not going to let it happen again. I owned it right then and there. I had to get written up. I signed out, walked out. Because I owned it and there was no confrontation, she didn't then sit there and like hold that against me and Hans, he was so disrespectful. Nope. And then some weeks later, my coworker made the same mistake, and she was all freaking out. And I told her, I said, when you go down there,
Just
own it.
Yeah.
And Julie, because at the end of the day, you did make that mistake.
Right.
And the only person to blame, regardless of what scenario played out, is you. You did ultimately do that. Therefore, just own it. Don't give her shit. Don't try to look for an excuse to save your own hide. Just eat it.
Yeah.
And she did, and it worked out great for her.
Yeah.
So yeah,
That's
it.
I mean, that's the way if we live our life more like that. It's like even when you go into other places, like just the fact that sometimes people go to, like, you don't always love your job all the way. Sometimes there's things you don't like about your job. But if you're choosing to go into the job, you're good.
Sorry.
Yeah. Basically, what I was just going to say is that you're basically giving your time. When you, like, I notice that people get very negative about work sometimes. Maybe you had a bad week. Maybe you don't love your job all that much. Maybe there's another job you'd like to have, but you can't have it right now. But people will come into the job with a giant negative attitude as a result. What happens if there's maybe there's 50% of the job you love and 50% of the job you hate? If you get so bogged down by the hated part of the job, it's like, okay, well, now you hate your job, even though it's 50% of the time of your job, you could be loving it. Mm-hmm. So instead of focusing on that, focus on the stuff you do like. Maybe find ways to make the stuff you don't like. So maybe at some point you get to move to a position where there's more stuff you like. Like, just focus on the aspects you can control. And also, I think if we reminded ourselves that nobody's making me go to work today. Literally at any point in time, you could decide I'm not going back to that place. Mm-hmm. And yet, so many people that I've met and worked with in the past go to work every day to be miserable.
Yeah.
And you would think somebody had put a gun to their head and forced them to come into work. No, yes, you may have a family provider. Well, you know what? He has to go to work or she has to go to work. Like, okay, we don't need to get defensive on behalf of ourselves or other people we know and be like, well, you know what? Easy for you to say if you like your job or whatever. My point is just that until you get something better, why be miserable?
Yeah.
You're making, whatever else we want to say, typically we're making a choice to, especially if you're going to be like that indefinitely, right? Mm-hmm. Now, you may have good reasons, good excuses. There may be things, maybe sometimes you just feel a certain way. I'm not talking about the emotional, like when you get emotional or depressed or something, but there's an element of choice going on, especially in that kind of scenario when you're talking about work. Just realize I'm choosing to go to work today. And if you really don't like it, start looking for other jobs. Mm-hmm. Start talking to your boss about, hey, there's a couple of things I have to do at work. I really don't like doing them. Like, is there a way we can adjust? Or is there, can you show me how to do it? Whatever. There may be a way to change it. And if there isn't, until you do, even if you still don't like it, just knowing that you're choosing to do it makes you feel less crappy about it. Mm-hmm. When you realize, oh, I'm making this decision. I'm here because of me. All of a sudden, you're not as negative about it because you're the reason you're here. We don't attack ourselves the same way we'd attack our boss or someone else who we think put us in a position that now is messed up. And yet it's hard for us to do because of all of the reasons we've already talked about. We don't necessarily have to go back into it, but I just wanted to say that because I think it's important to realize that the power we're taking, it just plays into so many areas, like relationships that are bad. We're going back. And yes, there's all kind of psychological reasons. There's like, I'm not trying to discount any of that. But I think the more we're able to consciously and effectively realize that it is us making these choices, the more we're able to then maybe actually change something because we're fully aware of our power and the ability to change things. And I think the more mired in life that we get, the less we can change it because we're getting bogged down with the psychological and all these other things and we're deep in it and we can't see it. And again, it doesn't mean that you don't need psychotherapy. It doesn't mean that, I'm not trying to just, because I mean, people have dealt with there's all kinds of things going on. I'm talking about this mostly from perspective of what can we do to help ourselves. And sometimes you may be so mired in it, or maybe there's extra special circumstances and you don't, get help or whatever it is that needs to be done. But there's a lot of us that think our lives are fine how it is, and if we would take the time to do this, our lives would get exorbitantly better.
Yeah.
Like just so much better. But we're too
when
right to do it.
I think when you don't sit there and spend the time to do some self-reflection, some like impartial self-reflection, and realize how your environment has, growing up and the things you've been through, how that has impacted you. When you are not able to connect the dots between your early life and the different patterns that appeared in your behavior at a young age, because those, without that conscious self-reflection to identify those areas, we will then revert to our childhood or our base tendencies that were
on autopilot.
You were a product of your environment and of your surroundings to an extent. Of course, there is some free will there too, but when you're not conscious, I feel like you have two choices. You can either choose to be conscious or choose to be unconscious. If you choose to be unconscious, then you're going to be shaped more by the thoughts, emotions, and feelings of other people and the situations you're in.
Yeah.
And you're going to allow those to then dictate how you behave versus being consciously aware of your actions and your needs and also your weaknesses, because then you are able to take control of the wheel versus just kind of being knocked around by the environment and by the emotions and the relationships.
A leaf in the wind instead of being the tree. The leaf just gets blown every which way by the wind and whatever else.
So what I'm hearing from this is we should be chanting japa. So to japa, real quick. I like chanting japa because when I chant, I like to think about these things, but I don't do it in the way of I'm chanting japa on autopilot and just dwelling on my, inner turmoil. Yeah. I try to, when I chant japa, I try to, before I start, I say a prayer to Prabhupada, I pray to Radharani and Krishna to help guide me better in Krishna consciousness. So then as I'm chanting, when I do feel my mind wandering to these things, because when you're chanting, I'm by myself oftentimes, or it's a great, however, when at least for me, when I'm chanting japa, I find it easier to catch my mind wandering over these topics and realize it's good that I'm thinking about these things, but while I'm thinking about these things, why don't I try to tie it back to Krishna? So how can I, if I would have been more Krishna conscious in this situation, would that have affected the way that I chose to behave in that situation?
Right.
I try to tie all that back to, Krishna, the Maha Mantra, and then also to realize that that is really the relationship that we should be cultivating, not just inside of ourselves and between us and Krishna, but between us and all of the other living entities that we interact with in life. Because, at the end of the day, we aren't just interacting with other living beings. That living being is a spark of Krishna's energy. So really, you're interacting with Krishna in an indirect way when you're dealing with other people.
Yeah.
So if you begin to see your dealings and your relationships, not that I do, but that's something that I'm trying to work towards. But if you understand that they're another spirit soul, and really I should be treating them no differently than if, God himself were to walk into our door, Prabhupada, how would I behave if some spiritually advanced person or Jesus walked in my door?
Yeah.
Would my behavior change?
Yeah.
If it would change, then that means that I'm doing something that probably needs to be looked at and corrected.
Yeah. Yeah. I think if nothing
Japa
else,
provides
that also is an exercise in selflessness.
Yeah.
If nothing else, even if you don't fully believe or whatever the case may be, taking the time to do prayer like that is an exercise in focusing on something other than yourself. Mm-hmm. Which is...
It actually provides fulfillment. It makes you feel...
And if it helps you to interact with people better, then even on the short term, there's a lot of value in it. Even if you don't personally feel or think or whatever, that there's the deeper levels of value that people claim that there are, then there's still something there that's helping people to interact better, to be more present to you, because they've learned to, they're working on themselves in a very deep way, and, that's the way that they're doing it, and it does help you to focus and do those things. I finally started chanting japa regularly now. I've been doing 3 rounds a day, which is so far above the 0 I used to do.
Yeah.
So
no, I've been slacking. That's another thing I find is actually...
I've been doing it on lunch. I just go for a walk on lunch and get it done.
Yeah, I try to do that when I'm at work. Not always successful, but I find that when I feel more frustrated and by the situations that I find myself in, when I really look at it, it generally tends to come back to, or at least one of the common factors is, I am neglecting that spiritual aspect of my life.
Yeah.
I'm forgetting, hey, isn't this what you're really striving for? And that's where the sadhana, the reading, that's why Prabhupada said reading and chanting and hearing every single day is important, because it keeps reinforcing what it is that we're really striving for. And it's not, it's real happiness and fulfillment and contentment, not just being physically happy, mentally happy, materially happy.
Yeah.
And when we find ourselves more upset and frustrated, it's because we are getting wrapped up in the ego. We're forgetting what's really important.
I think also if we remember that we are responsible for ourselves, in due course it becomes necessary that they are responsible for themselves, and we no longer as much have this automatic illusion that we're going to be able to control this other person, or that we should have expectations that we can't actually control the outcome of. And you may find that you actually end up treating each other in a different way, just with people in your life, various people, your friends, family, significant others, whatever the case may be. Because I think when you do that, you're automatically, how would you be frustrated with something that's outside of your control? A lot of frustration, I think, comes when we feel like something should have been a different way or could be a different way. So if we're actually able to, as much as we can, give up most of or all of that expectation, I feel like in a lot of ways it diffuses the explosiveness of our feelings, at least. You may still be like, this is not working for me, but you're going to feel a lot less attacked or whatever, volatile, because it's just kind of like, okay, well, what can I control? You're back to dealing with your own self, especially if both people can do it. But certainly, even if only one person can do it, it could make a huge adjustment. And I think also, people are able to do it at different times and different scenarios, and so therefore, we help each other and all that kind of thing. But I think this is a huge topic, and obviously it bleeds into like almost every area of life.
It does.
I mean,
accountability to your own actions and that we ultimately.
It bleeds into failure. I think a lot of people have a huge fear of failure, which ties into everything we're talking about. And I think people, I know a guy that I work with sometimes, is a doctor that I deal with sometimes, and he says that people, I guess there's a saying, I'm not sure who said it or what the quote is from, but people will hold on to being right until their life is on the line. And he says that in his experience, they will still hold on to being right even when their life is on the line. Mm-hmm. That people get so stubborn about it that it doesn't matter if they're going to die. They'd rather die than be wrong. Like, that is the way we act about
or
how
let your
right
life
we
come
need to
crashing
be.
down
Right.
around you.
I mean, obviously that's an extreme, but
yeah.
he's just meaning like we are often so attached to being right in some way, shape, or form that we're willing to blow up our life over being right. And if we could actually relax that and let other people be right and not be attached in every situation to being right and need to prove that we're right, if we could just go into a situation and actually think, how can I make all these people right? I mean, like you said, give them the space to. It doesn't mean you have to agree with them. It doesn't mean you have to agree with everyone and be Mr. Yes. It just means
not necessarily make them feel right, but make them feel validated.
Which is what right really means,
yeah.
I think. But yeah, I mean, then some of the people go, well, that's not the right word for that. Well, now you're getting into definitions of words.
Yeah.
People are raised differently. You hear one word. Some people have a really negative connotation to a word that somebody else might have zero negative connotation with. So yes, whatever word people feel is better for them. But I think from all the explanation we've said, they probably get the idea of what energetic thing I'm talking about. So if there's a different word for you, that's fantastic. I'm not trying to say that you have to use the word right. That's just the way that I've that's the way I've been describing it. So, but yeah, I think when you make I think because of the connotation people give right, it makes them feel wrong if somebody else is right. Mm-hmm. We're right or we're
only
wrong.
One person can be right.
Right. Only one team is right or what. Like, it just gets. Which I think in some ways is part of why I want to use that word, because I want us to get over that. I want it to be like less of a thing. Being right doesn't mean you have to be like this like horrible person because you were wrong. It just means in this instance, they have a point.
From their viewpoint, they're right.
Maybe we're both right. Or like whatever. Like it just doesn't have to be this huge attachment to being the victor or the master or the whatever it is that we're obsessed with in this mind that we have. And I think this has been a good conversation.
Yeah,
I think this is good. I think it's something for us all to think about. And let us know if you like these. We were doing these before we started reading. I'm thinking that we'll continue to do the reading like once a week like we've been doing. But we may start trying to move to more conversations.
Once a month or something, or I don't know.
These?
Yeah.
I'm thinking maybe even more often. I'm thinking we might try to do them at least most weeks. Maybe not every week. It maybe end up being like every other. But we'll try to do them every week if we run out of time. Like today we didn't actually read. So there may be weeks where we don't have time to do one. We'll do whichever one we're behind on. But we'll try to keep it where there's one talk a week. And maybe they'll be a little shorter since we already did reading. Our voices might actually get tired, believe it or not, even though we talk endlessly, seemingly. But we'll try to come out with this. And let us know, too. I feel like in the past people interacted with this more. Mm-hmm. And so I wanted to do this. And I think it's helpful to talk about our actual lives. You know, you're reading about things, it sounds good in theory, but how does that actually apply? What does it actually look like when you're doing it? Mm-hmm. And it's more back and forth. And so I think that's helpful. And maybe if people have thoughts or things that they'd want us to, maybe if you hear something in this and you want us to focus on that in the future or go into more detail on that, or if you disagreed with something, or if there's some other topic, like maybe similar but very like in a different side of things or a different place in our mind or intelligence that you'd like us to go and talk about and hear our perspective on, then we'd be more than happy to do that. So let us know. Yep. Thank you for listening. I hope everybody has a fantastic week. Stay healthy, stay sane. And
wear your mask.
Stay alive, everybody.
Oh, Lord.
Stay alive.